Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webcast, Optimizing Cloud Costs for Data and Analytics. So my name is Ben Dunmire, and I'm a Business Intelligence and Analytics Consultant at Thorogood, and I'm speaking with you today from our Philadelphia office. We'll look at our agenda for today's session. So I'll briefly introduce kind of Thorogood and what we do. Then I'll take a touch on cloud and just a brief overview of why we're talking about cloud. And then I'll jump into kind of some key concepts to be thinking about when we're considering cost-conscious application design, a cost-conscious culture for cloud, and then introduce some strategies that we've seen implemented and some ways to get along to that cost-conscious culture. And then we'll wrap up with a few items. So for those of you who don't know us, Thorogood is an independent global professional services firm specializing in business intelligence and analytics strategies, solutions, and services with a focus on our customers. We're a global company, so with offices in New York, Philadelphia, London, Bangalore, India, Singapore, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. All of our consultants are recruited and trained in the same way to develop a unique mix of skills, blending business understanding in the form of industry and functional experience with a strong technical aptitude and a deep understanding of analytical tools and techniques. We do offer a full range of BI and analytics services, including strategies and roadmaps, requirements design, implementation, and things like training and support. We are an independent consulting firm, meaning we don't work with one specific technology. We do, however, work and partner with many of the key players in the market in order to provide our clients with the solution that best suits their needs. When thinking about cloud, nearly all, if not all, of these technologies will have key considerations when it does come to cloud. So Microsoft Azure and AWS probably jump to the front of your mind as entire cloud ecosystems. But we also think about something like Databricks as a data engineering and science offering, Anaplan and Salesforce as software as a service offerings, and certainly many of the others. So being able to work with numerous technologies in the industry allows us to use the appropriate tools to best effect depending on the situation. So let's now jump in and talk just briefly about cloud. I'm imagining a lot of people are pretty familiar with cloud, whether it's kind of personally with all this, mobile devices and cell phones and things like that, or more so specific to data and analytics. So here we see the different cloud services models on the right compared to an on-premises model on the left. So the leftmost side is your on-premise kind of packaged software. You are doing everything from the applications, operating systems, networking. Everything is kind of the IT department in many cases responsibility. In the cloud, you have more options for kind of how you manage and run everything. First, and kind of the lowest level of cloud utilization is infrastructure as service, so IaaS as the acronym. So here, the provider will handle the operating system and virtual machines and stuff like that, while kind of the server, storage, and networking will be handled by the vendor. So here, the kind of organization is still managing what those tools look like, what the machines look like, and what the operating systems are, but a lot of the foundational stuff is handled by a software provider. Moving on to the next level, platform as a service, PaaS, kind of frees the organization of responsibilities of things like the operating system, middleware, and runtime. So really, in this case, only concerned about kind of data, managing the data, providing it, and then building the applications themselves. So these are kind of running on a software provider's VMs, for example. Don't really remote into them or log onto them as an example. And then the last one here, software as a service, which is kind of the lowest level involvement on the consumer side of things, and everything is kind of completely managed by the vendor. And really, it's just thinking about kind of licensing and access in many cases. So what's really kind of important to take away from this is that no matter what cloud model is used, you're kind of exchanging on-premise capital expenditure, kind of upfront costs, and staffing for kind of a pay-as-you-go or pay-as-you-consume subscription model. So it's kind of the dynamic at play. And if we think kind of why cloud, what are some of the key points that come to mind? Scalability, so scaling up, the ability to kind of create multiple instances or increase size or compute, for example. Elasticity, so kind of scaling out, scaling wide to kind of add more multiple parallel processing. Flexibility to kind of iterate and change pretty quickly, and I think that goes along with responsiveness, the ability to respond to new requirements or issues or react quickly. And there's also a lot of really interesting and powerful tools available in the cloud, which is a strong draw for folks. So here's just a slightly different view of what we just talked about, trying to demonstrate where responsibility lies across these different kind of cloud services offerings. And you can see it's pretty similar to what we just talked about. The message here really is thinking about cloud. We're thinking about who the responsibility lies on and how that might impact business decisions or solution design or everything like that. So it's interesting to think about and kind of has some underlying tones on what licensing might look like or how we might think about migrations or how we might think about building something in the cloud versus on-prem to start out with. So just a bit of another view of where responsibility lies and how that balance can fall depending on the services models that are used. So hopefully that gave a bit of sense of cloud. I think probably a lot of people are getting familiar with it, but useful to touch on some of those topics. I'd really like to shift now and talk more specifically about kind of data analytics and really start out with how we kind of think about cost-conscious design and establishing a cost-conscious culture when it comes to cloud usage. So the first question we want to answer is why. Why does responsible cloud usage really matter? Why is it important? And maybe some of the answers are pretty obvious, but worthwhile anyways. If we first think about the ROI, the return on investment, certainly cloud can be a large and very important investment for a lot of organizations as part of their digital transformation. So really, if we're thinking about using that responsibly, we're enhancing and pushing that ROI to be very positive, which is extremely important for the entire organization. Another item where what it's important is kind of removing barriers. So a lot of times we hear that business groups and business stakeholders are a bit unsure of using cloud or investing in it. They're kind of worried about cost exceeding, or they don't have kind of transparency into what costs might look like. So if being very responsible and organizationally and kind of in architecture approaches can kind of remove barriers and kind of ease people's minds on using cloud. We can also think about quality of the entire infrastructure and also the quality of solutions. So having some good governance strategies in place for cloud usage and kind of cost consciousness can maybe lead to more kind of streamlined solution design and overall better application design. DevOps, very kind of important topic and a much broader one than just one tile here. But really the concept of using some of the DevOps principles to work with agility, work with flexibility, to kind of manage release processes and code in a very kind of fluent and effective way. And I think that really lends itself well to responsible cloud usage and cost consciousness, taking advantage of those powerful DevOps principles and functionalities. I think balance is important, and here I've kind of thought about three levers really. Cost, of course, performance, and then time to delivery. And across these, you're often making decisions on, do I need something to perform better, which probably has a cost increase or an effect from cost. Or maybe we're willing to make some sacrifices for cost and performance in order to get to market a bit quicker. So there's surely kind of additional levers here, but it's an interesting dynamic to think about, and why does being responsible at how we're thinking about cost play into it. The last one here I'll mention is kind of the value add that cloud provides, and particularly kind of business-oriented solutions are going to provide. So if we think we can kind of reduce operating costs of solutions and maintaining them, then that gap or the gap between the value that something's providing and how much it's costing to run continues to increase. So it really plays back to return on investment. So I think kind of helpful to think about why we're talking about this, some of the important drivers for organizations. So kind of build off that, and we mentioned digital transformation and how it's really changing everything, but particularly in kind of the BI and analytics and AI spaces. When we're thinking about cloud and cloud usage, really wanting to promote a cost-conscious culture. So it's not necessarily a specific action or two, but kind of a culture and way of approaching the usage of cloud. So the way you have to think about it is the usage of cloud is really a shared responsibility across the entire organization. It's not, one group or a couple individuals. The whole organization will benefit from being cost-conscious and also kind of has a role to play in fulfilling that vision. So we think about the people involved. Executives are making strategic and decisions about the organization and prioritizing. Business stakeholders are constantly trying to assess the ROI and their investment in business initiatives or analyses. As developers, looking for kind of receiving immediate feedback on what solutions look like. If they can make very quick decisions on solution changes or redesigns, that kind of promotes that type of culture. kind of designers, the architects and engineers, they're wanting to think about what can we do to optimize our entire cloud to help enable teams to build those cost-optimized applications. Finance and accounting groups, they're responsible for kind of budgeting and kind of understanding and analyzing this cloud information and making sense of it and helping to make better decisions about it. And operations, which are kind of making large-scale changes very frequently and introducing optimization. So all these different groups, they play a role, they benefit from responsible cloud usage, and it's important to think about how they all come together. I think the underlying themes here are having visibility. So all these different groups understanding what's happening, seeing what's happened, and then being accountable for kind of their role in it or being accountable across the board for establishing the culture. And I think similar to visibility is transparency, being clear where appropriate about what's happening, how processes are working, what changes are being introduced, what problems do we have that we can solve together. So I think these are all kind of the people, the strategies, the processes, they all play into establishing the cost-conscious culture. So we talked about kind of the people at play. I wanted to kind of recognize some of the maybe some pitfalls or challenges that we've seen come up and kind of frequent ones to help kind of contextualize, where it can be tough to really achieve that cost-conscious mode. An interesting one, often seeing development environments being kind of sometimes highest cost 10 or even more times as expensive as production or quality assurance environments. And often that's a result of not being diligent about cleaning up things or not being diligent about what the design looks like and stuff that's not being used anymore. So probably something to pay attention to. And I mentioned kind of leaving things running or turned on that aren't needed. If I'm not using a virtual machine or a database, it should really be turned off or deleted because I don't want it to incur costs. Something that might happen is kind of not considering cost design throughout an iterative kind of delivery. So, very much we're wanting to iteratively deliver value, work with agility. We don't want to just think about the cost design right at the beginning or the cost implications right at the beginning. We're going to continually look at insights, understand what's happening, and make decisions along the way. So kind of something that can happen. An unclear tagging strategy, whether it's, what should the tags be, what should they be filled out with, what tags should I be using. That can kind of lead to a lot of confusion and delays, and probably can be fixed pretty quickly. Limited visibility. So I mentioned visibility is really important to understanding what are our cloud costs, what's driving them, how can I understand them. If there's no way to make this information available, no way to surface it, it's hard to expect people to make new decisions or change what they're doing and kind of drive insights. Something else we can see is organizations are really kind of driving to adopt cloud to move their data centers or to build out kind of data lake environments, modern data architectures to do analytics, and sometimes costs can be looked at later on and in some cases it's sensible. We want to kind of get set up, understand what the cloud can do and how we can use it. I think it's important initially to get a sense of what are your priorities, what are your strategies for kind of establishing a cost-conscious cloud usage environment. And it can be difficult to estimate costs. So the software vendors are very transparent in how things are priced and what those models look like, but sometimes it can be tough to estimate costs, and it's often something people are interested in thinking about. Well, I'm thinking about building this. Can we take an educated guess at what it's going to cost at full run or something like that? It can be tough to do, but it might be helpful to start thinking about some kind of calculators or building out some information of previous experiences to kind of inform some of that information. Kind of just a bit of a brief on some trends that we've seen, some strategies at play, and what I really like to talk about is implementing those strategies or some kind of approaches and methodologies that can be taken to I think really achieve that cost-conscious culture. So first, let's think about kind of our traditional BI and analytics solutions, and think about their application design and what are some things that we should be thinking about that delivery teams should be thinking about when they're designing those applications. Really, the two key points is data movement and resource utilization. That's really where we want to focus. That's really where we can take advantage of some opportunities to be responsible in how we're using the cloud. So I'll first mention kind of data movement and a few bullet points to talk through here. So we want to be kind of efficient and kind of targeted with our data movements. We don't want to be kind of unnecessarily moving data around because it kind of leads to inefficiencies in performance and in cost. Another point here, data egress, so bringing data out of the cloud to kind of on-prem applications is more costly and kind of should be more scrutinized than kind of moving data into the cloud, so ingress. And that kind of makes sense, when we're wanting to move data to kind of on-premise applications, or even wanting to move between cloud data centers. Those types of activities will incur costs. So we should be thoughtful about that. And really, that thoughtfulness has a couple key levers that I would see. The location of the source data, so where's that data being originated? Where are the majority of the users? Are they kind of centralized somewhere? Are they distributed? That has a role in how we think about data movement. And then even regulatory restrictions. It's probably a bit more apt for data storage, but really that movement in transit, those different kind of criteria should come into play as we're thinking about being intentional in kind of data movement and being very thoughtful about it. The next point here, the majority of our kind of modern data architectures are centralized around a data lake concept, so file-based storage. And Azure, it's the ADLS, Azure Data Lake Storage, Amazon S3, Simple Storage Service. And a few key points here. Definitely want to think about tiering. So all these tools have different options for how those files are stored. So thinking about what do we need kind of the lowest latency for, what can we store in kind of a colder state and more of an archive. Because we should be, storing data in its appropriate tier, and we can recognize some small cost benefits there. Another interesting point, storage is compared to like computation, very, very cheap, very, very easy to do. So if we can maybe duplicate data in some cases for like optimizing read and write, that might be something possible to do. So for example, if there's data that is needed by people in multiple regions, maybe we store that same data in multiple places, so we're not needing to move it between regions, not needing to read and write it so frequently. So I think one of the real drivers, and I talked about this, resource utilization, particularly for computing, and the area we see it is for data engineering and data science processes. So thinking about appropriately sizing infrastructure. So, in some cases, frankly, it's a bit of guesswork with multiple kind of parallel processing. How many nodes do I need? How big do those nodes need to be? It's not a perfect and exact science, but being kind of intentional about the decisions you're making in sizing infrastructure, validating it, getting information, trial and erroring to figure out what is the right amount of computation that you need for a given activity, and then being kind of conscious of turning things off when not in use. So a lot of the kind of serverless tools, Databricks, AWS, Glue, they'll kind of turn off, they're not running when you don't need them, and that's great because they're not incurring costs. But it's something to be kind of conscious of. Are we making sure we're doing that? And the last one here, relational storage. I think about databases and data warehouses. Firstly, understanding how costs are being applied. So often it's split, or sometimes it's together between storage and compute. So understanding what the model is for your given tool or tool set. In the same way, turning off things when they're not in use, and also thinking about scaling up or down during peak usage. So whether that's user usage, if it's a regional database, maybe we could turn it off during night hours, or maybe if it's used kind of more for transformational, kind of in process, we might scale it up at the beginning of our ETL process and then scale it off or turn it off at the end when we don't need it. Strategies like that. So I did mention kind of being transparent and being clear and having a good visibility about costs and how they're existing in the organization. So I'd like to kind of drill into a few key points there. I'll mention kind of maybe a few characteristics or things that can be really valuable or important to look at for kind of reporting on costs. Ability to filter is what's really helpful. I want to see my specific team or, based on my tags, my specific organization, what our costs are like. I can quickly drill down, and we know this from kind of reporting, drill down to the information I'm interested in. Understanding time trends, so whether that's weekly, monthly, yearly, seeing how things are operating over time. Are they growing? Are they peaks and valleys? I mentioned kind of development environments being extremely pricey in some cases when not consciously kept up to date. So maybe looking at the comparison, what is my production and QA and integration and dev environments? How do they compare to one another? Do I need to make some changes? Do I need to make some adjustments based on what I'm learning? Having these reporting tools, I want to be able to identify things that aren't being used. Maybe I didn't realize that I had a few VMs that I spun up initially and wasn't using them anymore. But if I have a kind of helpful report, I can see, there's 2 VMs that are assigned to my tag. I should really turn those off. Just being able to quickly make those critical changes. And then getting information, insights from others in the organization. So a lot we can learn from colleagues, people implementing similar or different things. we can learn a lot. And aggregated reporting can bring that together, drive that. So just wanted to call out a few things, maybe to be not necessarily weary of, but kind of be thinking about. A lot of the cloud platforms and ecosystems have inbuilt features, but in some cases they require licensing or elevated access to the environment, which might not work for the entire broad audience that you want to distribute this information to. You might want to apply security, so certain groups or regions might shouldn't have access to certain things. You might consider what visualization or analytic tools you have available to you and want to use things that are familiar to folks. How frequently do we want to refresh? I'd probably argue that kind of streaming or real-time cost information might be helpful, but maybe not in a lot of cases. It might be more useful to look kind of every day or even weekly in some cases. So, but considering what is that refresh frequency you want to do, and that might add complexity or challenges to what you want to do. And then thinking about how much historical data is important. Do I need to know what happened 3 years ago? Maybe not. So talking about a few kind of implementations, I mentioned kind of inbuilt reporting. So Azure Cost Management, AWS Cost Explorer, kind of the current items. There are also things like native connectors in Power BI and other front-end tools that natively connect to this information depending on access. And we think, a bit more bespoke, something that we've kind of seen done is the extraction of cost information, which is generally very, very easy, can store it in something like a data lake, do some cleansing of that data, a bit of modeling if you need to, and then store it in something like a relational database, and then visualize it. So here we might be able to add in like additional enrichment that isn't available natively or inbuilt, so historical data or different filtering and things like that, which can be helpful. So I just want to talk about now a kind of few guidelines before I talk about kind of actions we can kind of be taking. Defining environment controls is pretty important, and I think this goes beyond certainly just being cost conscious and responsibly using the cloud. It's just cloud usage in general, but thinking about who's allowed to release code, what does that process look like? Thinking about the kind of auto remediation policies or routines that might be in place to help manage the ecosystem to turn off resources that haven't been used in so much time. Thinking about tagging, so we've talked about this a couple of times, making sure there are clear standards, what needs to be tagged, how it's tagged, and then having that align with budgeting processes and internal processes. Establishing that shared responsibility. So we're really wanting to push to that cost-conscious culture where we're not thinking about kind of an IT-owned data center as everything. It's a shared ecosystem. Everybody is responsible for it. Everybody is kind of contributing to its payments, and we want to think about it that way and kind of shift the paradigm from legacy thinking, and then being able to continually optimize. So we want to, in anything, we're constantly looking for ways to improve and ways to address. Having that transparency of the information, thinking about our solution design, thinking about our implementation, we're able to evaluate and improve it. And that's technology choice, that's solution architecture, that's environment architecture, I think across the board. So your kind of last thing I want to do is really summarize some of the strategies, methodologies, and think about how can we actually drive action? How can we drive people to make changes, to make decisions, to think about this type of stuff? We'll start with kind of some of the fundamentals, which I'll quickly go through. Having reporting and monitoring visualizations dashboards available, defining those tagging rules, and a plan for cost allocation. And I think education's an interesting one. Maybe that's empowerment as well. Understanding how things are priced, what are the rules for pricing a database versus a computation ETL tool versus blob storage or S3 storage. Thinking about driving alerts and notifications. So a good way to instigate action. Whether that's about things being inactive, thinking about keying in on things like virtual machines or computation when it's being left on and it shouldn't be, and then maybe setting some thresholds that you need to raise to kind of more senior people if they're exceeded. And then even like taking advantage of some of these cloud tools to do more advanced things, use some artificial intelligence maybe. So thinking about driving insights to the right people. So based on tagging, can I drive a notification to the person responsible directly and get their engagement? Can we think about forecasting or doing some predictive modeling? Interesting things like that. So kind of just some opportunities where we can take a strategy and then try to implement it. So I'll quickly wrap up here with a few items. We talked about a lot of different topics today, and I've just captured them here, kind of all playing into responsible cloud usage, whether that's having transparency into cost, educating your organization, having best practices, getting more advanced with kind of policies and routines. They all come into play. They're all important, and there are certainly more bubbles around here. And the goal is really to take that responsible cloud usage and define a culture, or kind of create a culture where we're aiming to do this, just like we're aiming to be kind of achieving self-service or driving analytics. It's a kind of a very similar mindset and very similar story that we want to follow. And there's kind of decisions and kind of opportunities we can take advantage of, some of them I talked about today, to really enable that culture and make that part of people's cloud journey and usage of cloud. So with that, we're kind of out of time, and I'll wrap up there. Thank you for joining today and listening in. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions on my contact details on screen. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.